At my son Ethan's wedding, my new daughter-in-law Kelsey turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She pointed at my house and said, "A young family needs it more." My chest tightened as I answered with a steady "purr." Her face flushed, and before I could move, her hand cracked across my cheek. The music faltered, the guests gasped, and the moment froze. I didn't argue. I reached for my phone. With one quiet call, everything changed. 20 minutes later, the doors opened, and two men walked in. Along with them came the truth no one in that room expected. Before we continue, please subscribe and tell us what time it is where you are watching from. Henry Wallace's life was not grand, but it was steady, built on years of work that left their marks in small ways across his home and his body. He lived in a modest one-story ranch house on the outskirts of Dayton, Ohio, the kind of place where the front porch flag still fluttered in the wind, a symbol of quiet pride and routine. The house was practical rather than decorative, brick and siding worn by decades of weather, but it was paid for in full, a fact that gave Henry both peace of mind and a sense of accomplishment. Inside, his mornings began the same way. A chipped VFW mug filled with coffee, a faded Ohio State magnet holding up grocery lists on the refrigerator, and the sound of his boots on the linoleum kitchen floor. Every surface in the house told a story. A Craftsman toolbox rested by the basement door, its steel body dented and stained with grease. A lined ledger lay open on the counter, covered in Henry's careful handwriting, recording every bill, every payment, every sacrifice made for his family. The mantel in the living room carried the weight of a life gone too soon. A framed photo of his wife, Joan, smiled back at him from the center, her eyes kind and steady, the same look she gave him the night they first danced at the county fair. She had been gone 8 years, taken by illness after a slow decline that ended in hospice care. Henry had nursed her through that long goodbye, learning how to read medication charts and handle the quiet heartbreak of hearing her whisper in the night. Her absence lingered in the walls, in the recipes Henry still cooked. Every Sunday, he made chicken and noodles just the way she had, not because anyone asked for it, but because it reminded him of love and of the kitchen where she once stirred pots and hummed along with the radio. Henry's hands told his story as much as his home did. Scarred knuckles bore proof of decades spent on lathes and mills, machining parts in a noisy factory where precision meant survival. His fingertips were rough, the skin calloused, the veins standing out like raised roads. When he touched the ledger, the paper crinkled against skin that had shaped metal into tools, frames, and gears. He kept warranty cards from appliances in neat folders and receipts tucked into envelopes labeled by year. There was even one ledger page written in neat block letters titled "Ethan, from T-ball to Tech." Every milestone of his son's life had a dollar figure beside it. Team uniforms, tournament fees, school supplies, and later college tuition, and the laptop Ethan needed to begin his career in software. Childhood snapshots lined the hallway. There was Ethan with a county fair blue ribbon pinned proudly to his chest, grinning with a pie he had baked for a 4-H contest. Another frame held a Pinewood Derby car painted bright red, sitting in Ethan's small hands, with Henry's hand resting gently behind. In another, father and son fished off the dock of Indian Lake, a line dangling into the water while Henry's cap shielded his squinting eyes from the sun. There was one more memory Henry held especially dear, though no photo marked it. The night he taught Ethan to drive in the church parking lot, the boy's hands gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles whitened, Henry calmly saying, "Easy, son, steady on the brake." Each memory was proof of a life Henry had given his all to provide. On the morning of Ethan's wedding, Henry prepared with the same care he had shown all his life. He pulled his one good suit from the closet, a navy jacket and trousers he had bought years ago at Kohl's, paired with shoes he had polished until they caught the morning light. At the Speedway gas station, he bought his black coffee, no cream, no sugar, the same way he always did. In his inner pocket, he carried an envelope with a bank cashier's check, prepared as a contingency for the final reception settlement. Henry had agreed in advance that if there were any last-minute issues with the bills, whether catering or music or photography, he would cover them, up to a set maximum. He thought of it as insurance against embarrassment for his son, a father's way of ensuring the day went smoothly. He didn't plan to use it, but the check's weight in his pocket felt like reassurance. Henry's retirement income was a patchwork quilt. Social Security formed the base, topped with a modest pension from his years at the factory. His house was paid off, which gave him breathing room, but there was no fortune waiting in an account, no surplus for extravagance. He had always lived carefully, balancing the ledger to the penny. When Ethan asked for help with the wedding, Henry had set a firm cap, making it clear what he could and could not contribute. He was willing to step in for emergencies, but his retirement wasn't a reservoir to be drained. Kelsey, however, saw things differently. From the very first time she had walked into his home, Henry noticed the way her eyes moved, not over photographs or knickknacks, but across square footage, down hallways, pausing on rooms like she was taking inventory. Her compliments seemed polished, like lines rehearsed for an audience. She spoke brightly, telling Henry his house was charming and his yard quaint. But then, with the same smile, she asked how many guest rooms there were and whether the house was fully paid off. The words lingered in Henry's memory, not because of what she asked, but because of how she asked, as though she was taking notes for later use. Where Joan had seen memories, Kelsey saw equity. Where Henry saw roots, she saw property. Henry's neighbors had noticed, too. One afternoon, a retired friend from down the block stopped by and joked, "These new folks, they don't always know what it costs to build a life." The words were meant casually, but Henry heard the truth behind them. He thought of his calloused hands, his years in the factory, his careful ledger, and the house that had taken 3 decades to pay off. To him, it wasn't just property. It was proof of a life spent working, saving, and raising his son the best way he knew how. Still, on the morning of the wedding, pride outweighed unease. Henry looked at his reflection in the bathroom mirror, adjusted his tie, and thought about how far Ethan had come. The boy who once tugged on his sleeve asking for quarters at the county fair was now a man standing at the start of his own life. Henry felt both joy and loss in that thought, the way every parent does at a wedding. He wanted nothing more than to see his son happy. He told himself that his doubts about Kelsey were just the suspicions of an old man who had lived alone too long, a man who still set 2 plates on the table sometimes out of habit, forgetting Joan was gone. But deep inside, that flicker of unease burned, quiet and persistent, waiting for the moment when it would prove itself right. The ceremony itself had unfolded like something out of a brochure, polished and rehearsed, with every detail smoothed by months of planning. Tulips lined the arbor in neat rows. The string quartet under Ricky Malone's direction played light classical pieces, and guests shifted on folding chairs, whispering about how lucky Ethan and Kelsey were to have such a perfect day. The conservatory pavilion glowed in late afternoon light, glass walls reflecting back faces that were flushed with wine and the warmth of the moment. Henry stood in his place quietly, watching his son take vows, remembering the boy's first baseball game, his first spelling bee, all the nights he had stayed up to help with homework or repair something broken in his room. He held onto those memories like armor. When the ceremony concluded, Sean Patel, the photographer, stepped forward with brisk efficiency. His voice carried across the small crowd, cutting through applause and chatter. "Immediate family under the arbor," he called out, clapping his hands to draw attention. Guests shuffled, a few standing, a few staying back. Henry's body moved automatically. This was the moment fathers were supposed to step forward, to take their place beside the couple, to be captured forever in the photographs that would hang on walls and sit on mantels. He straightened his jacket, checked his tie with one hand, and began to walk toward the arbor with a natural ease, the way a man would who had been preparing for this moment for years. But before he could take his place, a voice cut through the air. It was Kelsey's voice, quiet enough not to carry to the entire crowd, but sharp enough to pierce directly into him. "Please don't. You're not family anymore. Greg will stand here." Henry stopped in his tracks, his foot suspended for a fraction of a second before settling back against the grass. The words hit harder than a shove. He looked at her face, searching for some trace of a joke, some indication that it was a mistake. But her eyes were cold, her mouth set in a smile meant for the guests, not for him. Before he could respond, Greg Hart, her father, slid smoothly into the empty space beside her, his arm slipping around her waist as if the moment had been rehearsed. His grin beamed toward the camera, his posture confident, and the photographer adjusted without hesitation. Ricky's quartet faltered for just a note, a violin string squeaking before the players recovered. Guests glanced at one another, confusion flickering across faces. Some turned away quickly, pretending not to notice. Others looked at Henry with pity. He stood frozen for a moment longer, then stepped back, his shoes crunching against the gravel as he retreated to the edge of the crowd. His heart pounded in his chest, and the weight of the envelope in his pocket pressed like lead against his ribs. He had always known Kelsey looked at him differently, but never had he expected she would erase him so publicly. The photographs continued, flashes clicking as though nothing had happened. Kelsey and Ethan posed with her family, then with bridesmaids and groomsmen. Laughter rippled through the group. Henry watched from the side, hands folded in front of him, his face set in quiet stone. His place had been filled, and the moment moved forward without him. He was left as an observer, not a participant. Later, during the reception, when glasses were filled and toasts began, Henry took a seat at a corner table, half shadowed by a column draped in garland. He told himself it was better to be out of the way, to let the younger ones have their celebration. Still, his eyes stayed fixed on the head table, where his son sat with Kelsey and her parents, laughter rising above the music. When Kelsey stood to raise her glass, the chatter quieted. Her voice carried across the room, clear and deliberate. "To my real dad," she said, turning toward Greg. "Thank you for showing me what a father really is." There was polite laughter from the tables closest to her, a scattered chorus of clinking glasses. At the back, among the few men who had once worked alongside Henry in the factory, silence stretched heavy. They glanced at him, then looked away, uncomfortable, their own glasses untouched. Henry felt the blood rush to his ears, but he stayed seated, hands steady on the table. His face betrayed nothing, though inside his chest the sting spread deeper than any wound. He lowered his gaze to the envelope resting in his lap, the edge of it visible beneath his suit coat. His fingers traced the seam, and with that touch came memories he had recorded in his ledger. The prom tuxedo Ethan had worn, paid for in cash after Henry picked up extra weekend shifts. The braces that had straightened his teeth, each installment scraped together at the expense of Henry's own needs. The OSU meal plan, months of food preloaded onto a card that kept his son fed while away from home. The winter tires for Ethan's first Honda, bought secondhand, but good enough to keep him safe on icy roads. The security deposit for Ethan's first apartment, signed by Henry's hand when the landlord asked for a cosigner. Each memory carried a figure, a cost, a weight Henry had shouldered without complaint. And now, seated in the corner, those sacrifices were invisible, erased in the span of a single toast and a few cold words. The humiliation was sharper because it was public, because it happened in front of neighbors, co-workers, and extended family. To them, the story of Ethan's life would be rewritten with Kelsey's flourish, his father's name omitted, his role recast by someone else. The music resumed, glasses refilled, and chatter bubbled back into the room. But for Henry, The sound blurred into background noise. His world had gone quiet inside. Shock held him still, humiliation pressed him down, and silence became his shield. The clink of glass against glass rolled across the pavilion, polite and rhythmic, as servers topped off water and champagne. Lemon beurre blanc drifted from the salmon plates, citrus and butter lifting over eucalyptus garlands threaded along the beams. Laughter from the head table rose and fell, and every time Henry glanced that way, he caught Kelsey leaning toward Greg, their shoulders touching like an answer to a question he had not asked. He let his hand rest on the envelope just once, a thumb against paper through his jacket lining, the reflex of a man who has checked his tools his whole life. Inside sat a cashier's check, contingency only, a backstop he had agreed to in the plain language of fathers who do not like surprises for other people's vendors. Venue balance, catering, flowers and decor, band and AV, photographer's remaining fee. The list was printed in his head the way a machinist keeps tolerances on instinct. 30,300 sat on that paper like a weight he could feel without looking. He took his hand away and folded both palms on the linen. If he kept touching the envelope, it would begin to feel as inevitable as breathing. It was not inevitable. He had told Ethan weeks ago, in even terms, that he would backstop the final reception settlement if something went sideways, that there was a cap, that a wire was scheduled for 9 a.m. the next business morning only as a contingency. The amounts were precise. Henry always kept them that way. Venue balance, $13,900. Catering, $8,750. Flowers and decor, $3,100. Band and AV, $2,600. Photographer remaining, $1,950. Total possible wire, $30,300. He could say those numbers backwards and in the dark. He breathed in lemon, butter, and heat from the kitchen doors. He breathed out years. The ledger pages unspooled in his mind the way a dial sweeps a faceplate, steady and honest. Community college first, because the scholarship covered only part. Tuition and fees for the first year, then a partial second before the transfer letter arrived. After that came the jump to Ohio State, with bursar statements filed by semester in a banker's box labeled Ethan, from T-ball to tech. He could see the subtotals written in his block print. Across 3.5 years, tuition and fees totaled about $34,200. He remembered every cashier line and every late-night drive back to Dayton after moving day runs. The braces came earlier, $4,100 across 18 months. Visits that always seemed to land when the Ford needed brake pads or the furnace coughed. He paid those bills in envelopes addressed with Joan's careful script until her hand shook too much to be steady. He kept the receipts clipped with a paper clip shaped like a heart, the little joke Joan loved to tuck into serious stacks. Sports fees moved like a slow creek through spring and fall. T-ball became Little League. Jerseys and tournament fees piling up beside travel coolers and gas to county fields. Football never took, but cross-country did, and shoes wore through with a regularity that matched the miles. Across the years, about $3,600 by his calculation, logged as participation, uniforms, and incidentals, a phrase that stood in for dusk drives and pep talks he never invoiced. The car came the summer before sophomore year at OSU. Not new, not fancy. A used Honda that sounded honest and steered true. The dealer wanted a co-signer. Henry put his name down without a speech. He remembered the high desk under fluorescent lights, reading each line twice, circling clauses that could bite if payments slipped. Winter tires followed with the first cold snap, and insurance climbed the way it does when a teenager joins the policy. By the time the balance zeroed, $7,800 had left his accounts in a pattern as predictable as snow. The internship that mattered most arrived late. An email from Cincinnati with an offer that could open doors. It also opened a problem. The apartment wanted first month's rent, a deposit, and utilities in Ethan's name. The start date left no time for paychecks to catch up. Henry wrote the checks and wrote float in the ledger margin, $2,900, to get a good man into a good start. He kept the deposit receipt in a sleeve with a sticky note, "Reclaim when keys return." Groceries never fit neat categories. They were the little things that were not little at all. Pantry restocks when Ethan came home on weekends with borrowed detergent and a furnace of an appetite. The winter box with chili packets and pasta. The jar of Jones pickles he rationed like currency. He slipped grocery cards into Ethan's pocket with a joke about starving artists, even though his son was not an artist and he was not starving. 5,000 to 7,000 across the years, a soft field of help that mattered as much as tuition. When he added the columns last spring, he wrote the sum softly in pencil, as if a hard press might insult the past. About $132,000 across 15 years, a running tally that included tuition, braces, sports, car obligations, deposits, and the great forgiving line labeled "little things." It did not include his time. He would not insult his love by turning it into billable hours. Clinks and soft chatter braided with the quartet's tuning notes. From the kitchen, a hush of steam carried lemon and butter, settling over eucalyptus and votives. When Henry had returned to his seat after the arbor, the scrape of his chair scratched the quiet, a sound he felt in his ribs more than heard. At the far side, Sean checked his list and moved toward the vendor table. The quartet tuned between songs. Dana, the venue manager, conferred with a server near the bar, eyes flicking to a tablet. Henry recognized the rhythm of people preparing to close a shift properly. In his plant days, the last hour of a run was precision. The handoff, the cleanup, the counts, the sign-offs. Weddings ran on the same clock whether anyone admitted it or not. He took the envelope from his lap and set it on the linen. The weight steadied him, then challenged him. He opened it half an inch and saw the crisp edge of the check, the bank's watermark catching light. He did not need to read the payee or the amount. He knew them the way he knew the torque on a familiar bolt. His thumb pressed the flap closed again. The bank had told him a void was possible tonight with identification, and the wire could be canceled with a passphrase if he called before business hours. The laughter at the head table peaked when Kelsey leaned into Greg again, and Greg patted her hand in a way meant to be seen. Henry felt eyes on him from the factory corner. Walt and Ray gave him a small nod, the kind of acknowledgement men trade when words would only scratch a bruise. He nodded back. It helped. He thought of Joan then, not as a ghost, but as a partner in the math. She had insisted on clarity when money crossed love, not because she loved money, but because clarity protects love from rot. "We help where help helps," she used to say. "We do not pay to be treated small. We give without keeping score, but we do not ignore the scoreboard if it is flashing red." He picked up his fork again, tasted lemon, and set it down. The envelope waited like a question he had finally learned how to answer. He looked at his hands, the scars across his knuckles from lathes and mills, the fine white lines mapping places a tool had slipped. Those hands had held his son through. Fevers, taught him to tie a bowline, signed a course withdrawal, and then signed the next semester's check anyway. The hands that might sign tonight were the same hands that had been asked to step out of a photograph. He drew the envelope toward his chest and pressed it flat with his palm. The numbers were simple. The history was long. Noise swelled at the head table. Dusk pooled under the trees beyond the glass. The decision rose in him, not as a surge, but as something level, like a dial, finding center. He let the words form, plain and final, a vow he could keep without theatrics. "I am paying to be erased, no more." He slipped the envelope into his inner pocket and sat back. Lemon and eucalyptus hung in the air. The band shifted to a slower song. Somewhere, a guest laughed a little too loudly at a joke that would be forgotten by morning. Henry rested his hands on the table and looked straight ahead, clarity finally louder than the clink of glasses. The pavilion doors sighed shut behind him, and the Ohio evening met Henry with a thin, honest cold. Tulips along the terrace railing wavered in the wind, their red and yellow cups tipping as if listening. He exhaled and watched his breath fog, a small cloud that rose and thinned over the flagstone. Somewhere a child laughed, and then the sound folded back into the wind at dusk. He set both palms on the stone coping, feeling its stored daytime warmth fading under his hands. He wasn't angry now. The heat had burned off in the clink of forks. What remained was something truer, like a machinist's gauge set against a part. The line must be here, not there. He reached into his inner pocket and slid out the folded ledger page he'd copied from his binder at home. The heading was plain in his block print: Ethan, from T-ball to tech. He read the column. He took out his phone. The black glass showed his reflection for half a second and then unlocked to his home screen, where 3 numbers waited at the top of favorites like set screws. He tapped the bank's line first. A calm menu voice offered options. He chose the one for scheduled transfers. When the agent answered, Henry gave his name, the last 4 digits, the passphrase he'd set with the manager when he opened the account. "I need to cancel a scheduled wire for tomorrow morning at 9, he said. 30,300, payable to the venue. The reference number is on my profile under upcoming transfers." A pause, keys clicking. "Found it, sir. You're requesting cancellation of the outbound wire and removal from the queue. Is there anything else?" "Yes. Add a merchant hold on my debit card for this venue's processor through tomorrow. Decline any night of charges that attempt to run against my account. I'll settle what I owe directly after I speak with management." Another brief pause. "I can place a temporary authorization block tied to the merchant ID we have on file," the agent said. "It will prevent new captures through midnight tomorrow. Your existing transactions will process as usual. Do you approve?" "I do. Please confirm both actions." He listened to the clack of keys and the quiet murmur as she read the standard disclosures. Then she returned, voice crisp. "The wire has been canceled and removed from the queue. The merchant authorization block is in place through tomorrow at 11:59 p.m. I've added a note that you will contact us if further action is needed. You'll receive 2 text confirmations within a minute." "Thank you," he said. "You've been very helpful." When he ended the call, the wind moved across the terrace again, a clean sweep that made the string lights tremble. His phone buzzed twice in his palm. Wire canceled, merchant block active. The words were small on the screen, but the relief they delivered felt structural, the way a long bolt draws 2 plates, flush. He scrolled down and tapped the contact he'd saved during planning meetings. Dana, venue. The phone rang 3 times, then picked up under a low murmur of kitchen noise. "Mr. Henry?" she said, recognizing the number. "Everything all right?" "Yes, thank you. I want to be transparent. I am not authorizing any further payments tonight. I've canceled a contingency wire that was scheduled for the morning, and I've placed a temporary hold on my card for your processor. I will speak with you privately when you need me, and I will handle any amounts that are mine to handle. But no additional charges are to be run without my direct consent." There was no surprise in her tone, only the measured professionalism of someone who has settled more receptions than most people attend. "Understood," she said. "We typically settle at dessert. I can meet you near the service hall after the cake is plated. We'll review the folio together." "That works," he said. "I appreciate your courtesy tonight." "Of course. My job is to make sure the celebration goes smoothly and the business wraps cleanly. I'll find you in about 20 minutes. He tucked the phone away and let his shoulders drop. Purpose felt different from anger in his body. It moved like a plumb line instead of a spark. Inside, the quartet slipped into a standard ballad. Through the glass, he could see Ethan laugh at something Walt had said. The sight caught him in the chest. The boy he had taught to thread a fishing line was still in there, no matter how grown the suit looked. Henry took the ledger page out once more, not to count, but to acknowledge. The pencil marks were faint, where Joan's hand had once traced them, asking what each line was for so she could celebrate the effort behind the expense. He pressed the fold tight and slid the paper back into his pocket for the last time tonight. The page had done its work. So had he. He opened his favorites again and scrolled to 2 numbers without names, the only entries not labeled by people, but by patterns: Tuesday and Thursday and Wednesday and Saturday. He had written those placeholders 6 months ago after noticing regular calls that never came on. Sundays. He had not decided then whether he would ever use them. He had decided only to be ready if a day arrived when truth needed witnesses. His thumb hovered above the first label. He did not press. Not yet. Breath in, breath out. The tulips nodded as another gust came off the pond, tapping their petals together like quiet applause. He counted to 8 and let the air leave slow. Tonight would supply its own proof without his help if pressed, but he would not rush anything. Precision beats force. That had been true at the plant, and it was true in families. He slid the phone into his jacket and straightened, testing his balance the way he did after tightening a final fastener. The decision was made. The steps were set. He would keep his word where it protected love and withdraw it where it paid for erasure. When the time came, dessert, as Dana had said, he would meet the account head-on, with the calm of a man who had built his life one measured turn at a time. He looked once more over the park, the last light rinsing the pond in pewter. Then he turned toward the doors, ready to walk back into the room on his own terms. The quartet eased into a velvet waltz while pavilion lights warmed to honey. Henry stepped in from the terrace just as the first dance began. Kelsey faced the room with that bright, practiced ease that read as charm from a distance and calculation up close. She lifted her hand, not toward Ethan, but toward Greg, and the 2 of them met at center plank, as if they had rehearsed alone for weeks. Greg's smile had the smoothness of laminate. Polite applause lifted, thinned, and settled like confetti that never quite lands. Ethan's line in the program said first dance with bride. The reality said otherwise. Ricky's quartet let a high violin carry the weight, then dropped the bass a hair louder, as if to drown out the part of the room that had stopped breathing. Henry, hands in pockets, watched the turn, the pivot, the kind of choreography that has more to do with power than with grace. He felt the old ache tighten behind his ribs and named it once, so it wouldn't name him. Ethan clapped because a groom claps when the room expects it. He glanced over his shoulder until he found Henry near the service corridor. Henry answered with one small nod that said, "I'm here." Ricky rode the mic between verses, congratulating the couple and the periwinkle dresses, shouting out the groom's wonderful family by name. He skipped Henry, then after a stage-whispered prompt, tossed in the man of the hour with a grin that slid off the room. The music covered the bruise it left. Henry did not chase it. He eased toward the coat alcove where Aunt Elaine wrestled a hanger with arthritic stubbornness. He freed the wool, helped her arms find sleeves, and settled the collar against her neck. Her hand, light and warm, patted his knuckles. "Thank you, dear heart," she said, the same way she did when Ethan was 8 and tracked mud across her porch. No one noticed. That was fine. Dignity does not require witnesses. Dinner pushed forward in tidy waves. Salmon glazed under lemon beurre blanc. Steaks bled a careful pink. Flatware chimed in bright flurries, then quieted to the hush of satisfied chewing. Henry took water rather than wine. Valerie from Kelsey's side drifted by with a sparkling flute and a controlled smile. She admired Kelsey's poise, spoke about how the right mentorship changes everything for a young woman with potential, and let the word mentorship hang over Greg like a medal. Henry answered kindly that the best mentorship is honest about cost and gratitude. Valerie's smile thinned a fraction and moved along. Ethan arrived writing that due north energy marriage gives a man for one long day. He grinned at Henry, at Walt, at the gift table where envelopes stacked like bundled mail after a snowstorm. Talk turned to neighborhoods with mature trees. Someone said Oakwood. Ethan laughed about starter homes. Greg lifted a glass. Kelsey, overhearing, said maybe they could skip the starter and simply start where it made sense. She said it sweetly, but the hook was set under the sugar. Henry's phone murmured against his pocket. He checked it under the linen. Wire canceled. A second vibration followed. Merchant block active. He breathed out through his nose, slow and even, and let the confirmations lock into place like a pin through a hinge. Across the hall, Nora, the venue manager, moved with a leather tablet tucked to her ribs. She glanced at a screen, frowned with the brevity of a blink, and slid through a door to speak with her assistant. The assistant looked toward the head table and said something that carried just enough to reach Henry's practiced ear. Pre-auth didn't clear. Course service shifted to stories. The quartet swapped to a Motown pocket that pulled shy cousins from chairs. Cake rose on silver stands as if it had grown there during dinner. Photographer Sean rolled a second case into the aisle and paused at Henry's table. "Before I deliver proofs, we'll finalize the remaining, correct?" he asked in a tone built for awkward moments. Henry met his eyes and gave a single yes of acknowledgement without volunteering anything more. Vendors began their quiet orbit. The band's road manager checked a clipboard that had seen rain and weddings and 2 near tornadoes. The florist's assistant eased stray stems into a bucket under the bar. The pastry chef wiped a sugared thumbprint from the knife as if it were a smudge on glass. Henry sat, sipped water, and counted. 10 minutes to cake, 15 to coffee, 20 to settlement. He could feel the vise tightening the way a machinist senses steel coming true against a tool. No drama, only accuracy. He opened his notebook just wide enough to read the top line, Tuesday, Thursday, penned in his square print. 2 receipts from Murphy's Tavern nested there, saturated paper that held ink like cloth holds smoke. Between them lay a cheap print of a white F-150 washed in sodium streetlight, the plate letters clear as initials on a lunch pail. A second slip bore a penciled string from a silver Civic. He closed the book. Objects were enough. The story could wait its turn. Sean's flash popped white behind the cake, and the room cheered as Ethan and Kelsey offered one another tidy bites. Frosting kissed Ethan's lip. Kelsey dabbed it away with a napkin like she was signing a document. The band softened to strings. At Henry's table, a crooked napkin holder annoyed his hand until he straightened it. Order is its own comfort. Ethan circled back. "You okay, Dad?" he asked in the voice that belonged to their driveway talks, not to microphones. "I'm proud of you, son," Henry said. He left it plain. Ethan's shoulders lowered a notch. "Thanks for everything," he said, eyes bright with the old boy who woke at 4 to fish with his father. He squeezed Henry's shoulder and slid back into the current. By the gift table, Kelsey held court with bridesmaids and a cousin wearing a braver dress than she felt. "Older folks should pass houses like torches," Kelsey said, flicking an envelope into the gilt box. "Equity ought to move to where the real life is." Heads nodded as if hearing a proverb. One bridesmaid glanced toward Henry, blushed, and adjusted a bracelet that didn't need adjusting. At the service station, servers stacked heavy plates like slate shingles and murmured times to one another. Nora checked a discreet timer and set it for 20 minutes. She spoke to the bartender, the pastry chef, and the floor captain, tying threads so the tug would be clean when she pulled. Henry watched and admired the choreography. Competence is a kind of kindness. Ricky returned to the mic and invited parents, guardians, and the people who shaped the couple to share a turn on the floor. Greg stepped eagerly, and Kelsey met him with a smile that tried to look modest. Henry remained seated and folded his hands. Nora conferred with Sean, then with the band manager. Her assistant reported that a courtesy pre-authorization had failed, and a backup card did the same. Nora's brows rose a millimeter. She asked whether Mr. Wallace seemed upset. Calm as an auditor, the assistant said, and Nora said, "Thank you," with professional gravity. The band poured a slower groove across the floor. Knees thanked chairs. The young clustered at the photo booth, sparkling under a ring light that turned everyone into a lake reflection. Henry's phone hummed once more. Transaction attempt declined. Merchant block holding. The message reassured him the way a torque wrench's click does. Exact, final, done. Greg made rounds like a district candidate. He shook hands, told a story about earning trust, and dispensed compliments in even scoops. When he reached Henry, he extended a palm with triumphant benevolence. "Good to see you enjoying yourself," he said as though granting permission. Henry shook and offered nothing for the man to climb. Walt leaned in and asked if Henry needed anything. "Just water." Walt returned with a glass beaded cold and a tale about a small mouth that had outsmarted him last fall. They laughed softly, two men grateful for the same river that keeps running whether people behave or not. At a nearby table, Ethan's co-workers compared Oakwood listings that looked staged for magazine covers. Prices sounded like phone numbers. Ethan listened with hope braided to arithmetic. Kelsey drifted through, and the tone brightened as if the room was auditioning for her decision. She smiled, and the conversation tried harder. A boy from the bride's side piloted a paper airplane between chairs. It skated near Henry's water and stalled on his napkin. He pinched the crease back to sharp and sent the plane home. The boy saluted and vanished into a forest of adults. Nora checked her timer. 9 minutes. She walked the arc to Henry's table first and lowered her voice. "Mr. Wallace, we'll approach the head table for settlement shortly. I'll keep it discreet. Is there anything you want me to know?" "Thank you, Nora," he said. "Only that I'll speak with you after. We'll separate what's mine from what's not." "Understood," she said, a word that wore both courtesy and steel. Sean drifted by, rotating a lens. "Before I push proofs, I'll collect the remaining," he said with practiced gentleness. His gaze went to Henry, the man who spoke in complete answers. Henry nodded once. Enough. Coffee replaced wine in the air. Candles shortened. The microphone found good hands and better stories. Ricky invited brave souls to share. A cousin did. A bridesmaid did. Walt did. Voice cracking once at the part where Ethan showed up in work boots after a February storm and cleared his drive without being asked. The room applauded something real and then settled back into its small performances. Kelsey took the mic and thanked vendors by company name. She praised the florist for making eucalyptus look luxurious. "Families look different now," she said, "blended and dynamic, and real parents are the ones who show up in the right ways." She lifted her glass toward Greg, whose attempt at humble could not quite find the shape. Polite laughter gathered near the head table. At Henry's table, factory buddies studied their hands and swallowed slow. The timer ticked for the last quiet seconds against Nora's palm. She silenced it with her thumb and nodded to her assistant. The assistant collected a leather folio and a pocket printer that could make a receipt appear like a conjurer's ribbon. Together they approached the head table with the gait of people who carry authority that doesn't need to be loud. Henry felt the room's pressure tilt, the way air changes before a front. He breathed in through his nose and out through his mouth. The numbers were set, the wrench was seated, the pull would be clean. In his pocket, 2 nameless numbers, only labels on a screen, Tuesday and Thursday and Wednesday and Saturday, rested. Like tools rolled in cloth. They had their own work to do later. Not yet. Ethan paused on his path back to the dais. "You sure you're okay, Dad?" "I am," Henry said. "Get cake before Walt eats your share." Ethan laughed and promised to fight for frosting. He squeezed Henry's shoulder and stepped into the light without understanding the current under the floorboards. Nora reached the head table and waited until Kelsey finished laughing at something Greg had whispered. "Excuse me, Mrs. Hayes. Pardon me, Mrs. Wallace," she said with polished care. "When it's convenient, we're ready to settle the remaining balance, 30,300, per the agreement your family signed at intake." Her voice did not carry far, yet the words themselves carried a kind of gravity that bent nearby conversations toward silence. "Of course," Kelsey said with her dessert smile. She turned her head toward Henry as though flicking on a switch. "Dad, go ahead." She expected routine. She expected the invisible machine to hum. Henry did not move. He let the space between her order and his answer open like a slow door on a hydraulic hinge. Somewhere in the back, a fork kissed a glass and leapt into hush. Ricky signaled the band to lay a soft vamp under the pause. The florist's assistant gathered stray stems. The barback stacked rocks glasses in a six-pack pyramid. Even the candles seemed to watch. Through the garden doors, the night pressed its face to the glass, reflecting the room back to itself. Light on wood, faces turned inward. Henry felt the ledger page against his ribs, square and certain. He checked the time and then stopped checking. He was exactly where he meant to be, and the vise was exactly as tight as it needed to be. No tighter, no looser. The next sound would belong to Consequence, and Consequence has perfect pitch, absolutely final and clear. Nora walked to the head table with a leather folio and the calm of someone who closes tabs for a living. She waited for a laugh to fall, then angled her voice so it reached the two people who mattered. "Mrs. Hart, pardon me, Mrs. Wallace, we're ready to settle the remaining balance. $30,300 per your family's agreement." Kelsey turned to Henry as if she were asking for more bread. "Dad, go ahead. Number." It wasn't loud, but the room heard it. Conversations thinned to threads. The violinist hovered on a note and let it go. A spoon stopped tapping a saucer. Henry kept his shoulders square, hands easy at his sides. "You told me I'm not family," he said, measured and steady. "I don't pay for strangers." Kelsey blinked as if a fly had crossed her line of sight. Greg cleared his throat in the tone executives use when they expect the world to yield. "We'll coordinate Monday. Per contract, settlement is due tonight," Nora answered, professional and kind. "We can take a card, check, or wire authorization." Sean the photographer edged close enough to be respectful. "Before I release proofs or the teaser reel, I'll need the final payment, as agreed." The band manager touched his clipboard. "We'll square up prior to teardown. That's in our rider." Ethan looked from face to face like a man tracing a circuit with his eyes. "Kelsey, is this handled?" he asked, voice careful. "Of course," she said, then added to Henry with sugar that didn't taste sweet. "This is not the time to make a point." Nora didn't move. Her stillness said minutes cost money. Kelsey pivoted to the gift table. Bridesmaids crowded to give cover and accidentally made a spotlight. She opened envelopes with fast fingers. 20s, 50s, a few hundreds. Checks in tidy cursive. A stack formed. 6,000 in mixed bills. 7-2, 7-9. 8,202 ones pulled from the bottom of the gilt box. She looked at Nora as if hope could close the gap. "Policy requires either payment now or we initiate collections and hold photo and video media until the balance is resolved," Nora said softly. "The kitchen crew is on the clock. The band is on the clock. My staff is on the clock." Kelsey's voice climbed. "You're ruining my wedding. Henry, you are ruining my wedding." Henry answered without heat. "You did that when you told me I wasn't family." Factory buddies at Henry's table nodded. They understood invoices and respect. A few country club friends studied their flatware. Greg lifted his palms and produced phrases like liquidity, boundaries, young adults standing on their own. Valerie murmured about principles and prudence. The room heard we won't pay. Ricky let the band fall silent. A mic squealed once, oxygen thinned by a degree. Nora faced the guests. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll pause music while we resolve a private business matter. Thank you for your patience. Private evaporated. Kelsey spun back toward Henry, and fury outpaced calculation. The slap landed sharp and public. Audible gasps broke at 3 tables. Henry didn't flinch. He had been hit harder by years, by a layoff notice, by the morning Jones oncologist said the word no one wants. He took out his phone, scrolled, tapped. "It's time," he said, then put the phone away. 20 minutes stretched like a held breath. Coffee cooled, candles shortened. Nora kept staff busy with small motions that kept the room from tipping. Cups cleared, linens smoothed, doors checked. Sean sealed a spare battery in a pouch and waited near the service hall. The band's road chief coiled a cable and uncoiled it, counting loops in his head. Ethan stood next to Henry for a moment that felt both long and short. "Dad, what did you do?" he asked. Not accusing. Not yet. "I did what you would do for your son if you knew what I know," Henry said. Ethan held his gaze and then returned to the dais because a room still expects a groom to stand somewhere. The pavilion doors opened with ordinary hinges that sounded like a cue. 2 men stepped inside almost on the same beat. Dylan Brooks arrived first, grease under. His nails, shop shirt patched with his name. His eyes swept the room, landed on the white dress, and widened. "Kelsey? You said you were at a work dinner." Trevor Lane followed, breath high, retail polo still clipped by a name tag. He took 3 steps, saw Kelsey, then saw Dylan. "Kelsey? You said we were looking at apartments next week?" A ripple passed the guests. It didn't sound like gossip. It sounded like recognition catching up. Ethan's voice came from someplace new. "How do you 2 know my wife?" He did not shout. He asked the question that organized the air. Henry stepped forward enough that the head table could hear him and the microphones couldn't. "On Tuesdays and Thursdays, she told Dylan he was her only one," he said, voice low and steady. "On Wednesdays and Saturdays, she told Trevor the same. Sundays and Mondays, she saved for Ethan." He set a slim folder on the cloth and opened it without flourish. Timestamps, dates, places, Murphy's Tavern receipts, a white pickup under a street lamp, a silver Civic at the Riverwalk. He did not narrate. Paper did the work. Dylan lifted a page and tilted it toward the chandelier. "That's us outside the shop on a Thursday," he said, his voice dropping. "You said your shift ran long and you didn't want the boss to see us." Trevor slid a photo from a sleeve with brittle care. "This is Wednesday by the river," he murmured. "You told me we should live near here." He pulled his phone and tapped fast, then held the screen up. "Then why do I have a lease application with both our names?" "They're just friends," Kelsey said too quickly. "You're twisting nothing into something. I mentor people. I network." Dylan unfolded a wrinkled receipt and laid it beside the lease. "Then why do I have the ring deposit you told me to keep quiet until you were ready?" The paper looked ordinary and sounded like thunder. Greg tried to pour oil on water he didn't own. "Let's not misinterpret." "We're past careful," Dylan said, not loud, finished with asking. Valerie stepped backward from the head table as if from a machine about to engage. Whispers on Kelsey's side ebbed when eyes from Ethan's side met them with plain disapproval. Ethan squared his shoulders and stilled, the way he used to before a free throw. Noise left the court. Only necessary remained. He looked at Henry, at the folder, at 2 men holding proof against a practiced smile. Then he looked at Nora. "Cancel," he said. "We won't be continuing the reception." Nora nodded once, grateful for clarity. The machine she ran turned with soft competence. The band powered down into a warm hum and then silence. Lights shifted to work levels. Servers wrapped, labeled, stacked. Sean stowed his primary camera and zip-tied the media case with a click that felt like a period. Greg sputtered about legality and process. Valerie offered phrases about next steps and contingencies. Neither produced a card. Kelsey sank into a chair under the eucalyptus arch she'd chosen because it photographed well. The influencer grin was gone, replaced by a mouth that didn't know what to do without applause. She put both hands flat on her knees as if holding herself to the chair. Guests rearranged around the truth. Factory buddies drifted to Henry's chair and made a quiet wall at his back. Walt took Henry's coffee and replaced it with water. Aunt Elaine asked a server if she could take a slice of cake home. Of course, the server said, dignity included. Trevor stared at the lease again, as if looking changed what it meant. Dylan folded the deposit receipt back into a square and slid it into his pocket. "I'm sorry, man," he told Ethan. "I didn't know. I would never—" Ethan shook his head, cutting off the apology. "I know. You didn't do this to me." Sean approached Ethan at an angle that left him room. "I'll keep everything secure," he said. "When you're ready, call me. You'll get what you deserve, meaning files when they're paid for, and maybe meaning respect." Ricky signaled his players to pack. The ring light at the photo booth blinked off. For a second, the pavilion looked like itself again, not a picture of itself. Nora stepped to Henry. "Mr. Wallace, I'll be in the office off the foyer when you're ready," she said. "We'll separate tonight's services from the remaining balance and proceed accordingly." "Thank you," he said, and she moved to shepherd a bus tub through a knot of chairs without scraping anyone's pride. Greg tried one more pivot to authority. "Young man," he told Ethan with borrowed paternal weight, "you can't end a legally binding event because of gossip and misunderstandings. There are consequences." "There are," Ethan agreed, and his eyes didn't ask Greg's approval. "This is the consequence." Kelsey reached again for the gilt box, chasing arithmetic. A few envelopes remained. One check to Ethan and Kelsey for $100. A home store card. A note about love being patient. None of it paid the bill she owed the room or the one she'd rung up in 3 hearts. Nora returned to the head table with practiced non-judgment. "For documentation," she said quietly to Kelsey. "Please sign, acknowledging receipt of goods and services provided to this point and the outstanding balance due." Kelsey's hand hovered over the line, then scribbled a signature that looked like someone else's name. Ethan turned to Henry the way he had turned as a boy after his first strikeout, not for rescue, just for gravity. "Let's go home, son," Henry said. The word son carried a driveway shoveled together. A Pinewood Derby car sanded past midnight. A winter morning when the Civic wouldn't start and 2 sets of gloves fixed it. Ethan nodded. He looked once at the arch that would be in a flower shop's van in 30 minutes and then at Kelsey, who did not look back. He didn't speak to her. Words had no weight left. They walked through a room that parted without fanfare. Walt fell in behind them until the door, then turned to help Aunt Elaine into her coat. Outside, the Ohio night had cooled clean. The lot lights threw long, honest shadows. The air felt like water over hot metal. Shock, then steadiness. Henry held the door and let it swing shut on the soft sounds of teardown. Tape ripping, latches closing, the low murmur of staff taking care of what could still be cared for. Inside Nora's office, a printer would soon cough a revised invoice down to the penny, subtracting what had been consumed from what would not be. Sean would lock his media case in a closet with a code only he knew. The band would load out. The florist would reclaim vases. Nora would note, settlement pending, media on hold, incident handled professionally. Handled professionally. No escalation. Guests dispersed without incident. In the log, she would record times, names, and the simple sentence vendors notified, bride informed, groom authorized cancellation. It would live in a folder no one outside the office would ever see. proof that order can be restored after a storm. Procedures are cold comfort, but they let people breathe. She believed in that, the way Henry believed in wrenches that fit. Kelsey remained under the arch like a figure people walk around in a museum, not because they admire it, but because it is there. The eucalyptus that had smelled expensive now smelled sharp and wrong. She pressed her fingertips to her temples as if she could push time back through her skin. The room did not turn toward her again. Henry and Ethan reached the truck that had carried t-ball bats and moving boxes and hospice blankets. Ethan paused with his hand on the handle. "Thank you," he said to the dark, to his father, and to the stubborn part of himself that had learned tonight where a boundary belongs. "Let's go," Henry said. "Home is still home." They climbed in. The engine turned on the first try, like a promise that had held. The pavilion lights shrank in the mirror and slipped behind trees. Somewhere behind them, a single violin string hummed once, remembering the last song, and then fell quiet. The Ohio night spread calm over the road, and Henry's old F-150 fired on the first turn. The dash lights glowed amber. Ethan buckled in without a word. They rolled out of the park, the pavilion shrinking to a smudge in the rear view. Wind slipped around the cab. Nobody touched the radio. Quiet felt like the only honest soundtrack. They passed the strip mall where Henry picked up Joan's prescriptions, the warehouse road where Ethan learned to shift, the church lot where he stalled, then grinned when second gear finally took. At the diner corner, the neon pie sign flickered. Henry eased into the lot and parked. They didn't go in. They stood under the neon, and he let a memory breathe. "Your mother used to make me split one slice," he said, "2 forks, cherry pie. And the waitress would wink like we were teenagers. First winter after you were born, the truck heater barely worked. She laughed so hard at my fogged glasses," she cried, then handed me a napkin like a prize ribbon. Ethan smiled, jaw tight but softening. "I remember her laugh," he said. "It filled rooms you didn't think had extra space." Back home, the porch light seemed to recognize their steps. Henry crossed the living room and turned on Joan's favorite lamp, the one with the warm shade that made evening feel like honey. In the kitchen, he set water on. Tea tonight. Ethan stood by the mantel. Joan's photo held the lamplight. "I didn't listen," he said when Henry set 2 mugs on the coffee table. "You told me something was wrong, and I treated it like interference. I heard criticism instead of care." "You were in love," Henry said, keeping his voice gentle. "Happens to the best of us. It lays a film over the eyes, like steam over a mirror. Till the room clears, you think what you want to see is what's there." Ethan nodded. "I made plans with a picture that wasn't real. I invited someone into our family without seeing who she invited into ours." The clock in the hallway ticked. The furnace hummed. A dog barked twice and quit. Henry reached for the ledger on the end table. The green book had lived there for years. He opened to a clean line and wrote, "Careful and plain. No further advances. Boundaries. Protect. Love." He signed and dated it, like a promise. Ethan watched. "What does that mean for us, Dad?" "It means I'll always show up with my hands and my time," Henry said. "It means I won't fund the erasing of what we built. Money can water a tree or drown it. I've watered too long in the wrong places. Now I'm going to tend what's here." The phone buzzed. Unknown number. Henry flipped it face down and slid it away. "Not tonight," he said. "If it's important, daylight can hold it." Ethan exhaled, a knot loosening. "I'll call Nora tomorrow," he said. "I'll sign whatever stops vendors from chasing you. I'll call Sean and thank him. We canceled. We'll pay what we owe for what we used, and nothing for what we didn't." "That's the right way," Henry said. "Dignity isn't free, but it's cheaper than pretending." They drank tea, letting warmth work outward. After a while, Henry opened his laptop. He typed slowly, meaning every word. He chose May. He booked flights to Phoenix, a rental car, a room near the South Rim. He added a calendar note. Grand Canyon for Joan. "You're finally going," Ethan said. "Your mother wanted to stand there," Henry answered. "She said if our life was a canyon, she hoped the river cut it with patience. We never made it. I'm done postponing what matters to finance what doesn't." Ethan rubbed his eyes and laughed once. "You always make sense after midnight," he said. "I hated that when I was a teenager. Now I hate that you're right, because it means I have to act like a grown man." "You already did," Henry said. "You said cancel. You asked for an invoice. You told the truth, out loud. That's most of adulthood." He slid the ledger into the desk beside Joan's recipe box and the mortgage release that read paid in full. A roof without debt felt like a hand on a shoulder saying, "Keep going." Ethan's phone lit with messages. He didn't look. "I'll deal with the noise tomorrow," he said. "Tonight I want to sit in this room and remember the floor we're standing on didn't come free." Henry nodded. "The neighbor was right," he said. "New folks don't always know what it costs to build a life. That's on us for not saying it earlier. But we said it tonight." He pulled down a photo album and opened to a page with a boy in a paper crown biting a lopsided cake. Joan's handwriting curled under the picture. 7 years old, icing in his hair. "Good day." He handed the album to Ethan. "We'll get new pictures," Ethan said. "Sunday mornings, hardware store runs, bad coffee that tastes good because we earned it. Maybe one day there will be another wedding. If there is, it'll be honest from invitation to toast. When it happens, I'll be there with a tie that fits and a check that doesn't buy my disappearance," Henry said. "And if I forget, you'll remind me of this line I wrote tonight." They rinsed the mugs. Henry turned off the kitchen light and let the lamp rule the room. The house settled, a ship at anchor after rough tide. The phone buzzed again. He ignored it. Outside, a patrol car rolled past. Blue light flickered and was gone. He looked toward the camera and spoke like a neighbor over a fence, steady and kind. "Enabling isn't love," he said. "Boundaries are kindness with a backbone. If you're raising kids, grandkids, or just keeping your dignity in the face of demands that sound like love but spend like debt, write it down. Say it out loud. Money is a tool. Use it to build a home, not to buy your way out of one." Ethan straightened, as if the sentence landed where it needed to. "I'll sleep here tonight if that's okay," he said. "Guest room still has my old quilt?" "It does," Henry said. "And it's not a guest room. It's your room. Some words don't expire." Ethan carried the overnight bag they hadn't planned to pack. At the hallway, he looked back. "Good night, Dad. Thank you for choosing me." "Always," Henry said. "That part isn't negotiable." When the house went quiet, Henry walked the rooms the way he always did. He checked the back door, glanced at the stove, straightened Joan's photo without thinking. He rested his hand on the frame. "We did all right," he said to the room. "We paid what mattered. We learned the rest." He turned off the lamp. The dark settled warm, not heavy. Morning would bring phone calls and logistics and the work of making right what could be made right. Tonight there was tea in the sink, a ledger with a fresh line, a flight confirmation to a place where stone tells time in patience. Tonight there was a son asleep under an old quilt and a father who kept the balance where it belonged. The house breathed with them. The clock kept its pace. Somewhere a train called and faded. Henry let the sound lead him toward sleep, grateful for a life that still answered to his name, and for the stubborn dignity of saying no when no was the only honest yes left to give. He opened his banking app for one practical check and set the phone down again. The $30,300 sat untouched, right where it belonged, no longer earmarked for applause that never included him. He penciled a budget note on a pad by the desk, a list of things that actually make life better. New tires before winter, porch rail repair, a weekend visit to his sister in Chillicothe. Tickets to a Clippers game in July. Maybe a small tool he had put off replacing, the socket that slipped every time. He added one more line for May in big block letters, not a bill, but a promise. Stand at the rim, breathe deep, tell Joan we finally made it. If this story touched something in you, take a moment to subscribe, like, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Stories like Henry's remind us that love is not about paying to be erased. It's about standing tall with dignity when others try to push us aside. We'd love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever had to set a hard boundary with family? What happened, and how did you find your strength? Sharing your own experience might give courage to someone else who is still learning how to say no when it matters most. This channel is about more than stories. It's about building a community of people who know the cost of betrayal, the sting of being told they're not family, and the power of quiet justice. Together, we can remind one another that money doesn't define love, respect isn't bought, and boundaries are what protect the bonds worth keeping. And stay tuned, because next time, we'll bring you another powerful story. A grandson tries to evict his grandmother, thinking youth entitles him to her home, until the deed says otherwise. That one is going to be unforgettable. Subscribe today, leave your story below, and come back each week for a new chapter where silence becomes power and dignity wins.